Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. We didn't even get a tenth of the things in the last show we wanted to with our panel of state senators, who I will quickly introduce this time around, very quickly. Senator Landis is chairman of the Revenue Committee. We're going to be talking revenue and dollars big time in the unicameral in this show. Senator Vicki McDonald of Rockville is with us today, also Senator Jean Tyson of Norfolk, and Senator Pam Brown of Omaha. We've plucked you out from around the state. We're glad to have you here. The budget is, well, I guess this is budget crisis year 2? Or are we really in like 3 or 4?
I don't see it as a crisis, but it is the trauma of the budget. I think it's the third year.
Third year, yeah. We have, the last time I heard, by the time this airs in January, the last time I've heard, we're in the neighborhood of $200, maybe $11 million short on, what we need. We've already cut how many million, but any more cutting has to go on top of the cuts already done. So, what is the greatest heartache, potentially, of dealing with the budget this session? No one wants to say.
I'll try to. Let me tell you that I start from a different place. I don't think that our current budget situation requires us to cut $211 million. We have a shortfall, but we also have a 3% budget reserve. So, our budget doesn't contemplate spending all of the money in the budget. It contemplates 3% left over. 3% is greater than $211 million. So even though we're short $211 million at this moment, that is not money we expected to spend for goods and services. That was money that we expected to keep in our back pocket to last throughout the 2 years. Now, it is a trauma. But it's only a trauma when, at the end of that budget cycle, you have to replace that money for the next budget. But it doesn't require closing buildings, laying off people. That's money that's in, essentially, a reserve. And secondly, we have another reserve that has $170 million in it. So we're not as badly off as we have been in other years. That's why I would not regard this as a crisis this year. However, if you look 3 years out, it does start to become significant. And there, you've got to look at Medicaid more than anything else, from my estimation.
In other words, who's included and who's covered in Medicaid?
And what services are covered?
That is increasing at double digits. And it doesn't take very long. It's already a huge part of our budget. 40% of the budget is aid to local political subdivisions, mostly state aid to schools. Another 25% is Medicaid, and it's growing.
Okay, now excuse my naivete. I know that the cost of medical costs are going up, but is this because, in addition to that, and we do have some sort of controls over how much we put out per service, but is this because more and more people are being included because we're having more people who need Medicaid? Is this just because of the increases in medical costs? Why is that?
Medical costs are driving almost all of the problems that we're having with the budget. If you get down to it, it's a part of the increased cost for insurance is a part of the amount that we pay for state aid. It's a part of corrections, a huge part of corrections. It's a part of higher education, the insurance piece.
And all the employees.
And then directly in the Medicaid. And I think it's more the increasing costs of paying for all the myriad of services that are available under Medicaid than it is increasing the number of people, although we've done that to a certain extent with the Children's Health Insurance Program. It brought people in not only into the children's program for health insurance, which was for a little higher income, but a lot of people into Medicaid that didn't know that they were eligible for Medicaid.
Okay, so that's within the next 3 years, that's something that has to be, probably face some tough and even controversial
And that's going to be it's
reductions.
going to be nationwide because it's all Medicaid is a federal program and participate
We've
the states.
overpromised for what our current revenue engine will yield. And it is growing, as Pam says, exponentially in relationship to the revenues. So it's bad and can only get worse quickly unless you cut back on promises, reduce the amount the services, someplace in there. But our
We did.
promises and our revenue don't match.
We did cut several of the options in Medicaid a year ago. And there are still some options out there, are there not?
Oh yes.
So, but that's something to stay tuned for. Do you see it happening this session? Some of it? In what areas possibly?
Jim Jensen's sitting on a consultant's report. The consultant's report is not out. One of the things is people who are on Medicaid, but because of, let's say, an inheritance or an intergenerational transfer, have resources that can be used to repay what they've received in services. That going out and finding those situations will
That's
be in that
costly
mix.
too.
That's costly too. And the consultants basically said this: we can find a pot of one-time money Medicaid savings and some ongoing savings, but not a great deal, but some. That money needs to be spent to persuade people that they will be ultimately responsible for their own medical costs, because over time the system will not continue as it currently exists, and people need to buy nursing home insurance for themselves. That trend-wise is something that will need to happen, given the fact that we've overpromised for what public revenues can do.
And will we be able to have some sort of an incentive, tax incentive for them doing that?
If it reduces our existing revenues, probably not. And by the way, the consultant says it has not been very effective.
Oh, really?
You can't induce by tax incentives that behavior. That has not been an effective tool. The cost of the incentives to what change in the marketplace has occurred has been limited.
You heard it here. I mean, I think if anything that we could talk about, and we could talk about all kinds of things, guess what the state senators, when they get together, are going to do. But that is one of the things that, in terms of thinking, if you want to think ahead on your own personal well-being,
That's right.
that's probably, and you're not hearing a lot about that.
Yeah, it seems to
Nationally.
me that if you, and this is one of those things where people are saying, a person who's 25 is saying to themselves, will there be Social Security? But in a shorter timeline, it seems to me people are going to ask, we're going to need to ask themselves, will Medicaid be there for me in the way that I now see it? And my expectation is no, it won't. And in fact, nursing home care insurance is a shorter term action that people can take to respond to what I think is the fastest moving area of public policy.
If you look at our nursing homes, more than 50% of the residents there are on Medicaid. And we're a proud state saying that people in Nebraska live longer than any other place. Well, we have to pay for those people being in the nursing home. Up to 100, 102 years old is not unlikely for people in the state of Nebraska. And many of them outlive their wealth. And we are responsible for taking care of them. So that's a big issue. Big issue.
And one of our colleagues celebrated his wedding anniversary by buying long-term health care for himself and his wife.
Not a bad idea. So
Mazel tov.
absolutely. And so that's something that is going to be coming. Any other things, short term, in terms of cutting what is considered a very big and spending type program, and that's Medicaid. Our parts of Medicaid obligations. Nothing else that you see real short term?
Well, we made some changes in terms of the families that receive care under the Children's Health Insurance Program, and whether the caretakers, the parents or the caretakers of the children received health insurance, and then that has been stayed by the court. But I think that we will probably consider it again.
Okay, so these are areas where you're going to see cuts, maybe short-term and long-term. What are some of the other areas where, because of just the economics of it, as with Medicare and the number of people on it and the cost of medicine, what other areas are just sort of doomed to cuts because of their growth, their unwieldiness?
Well, last week we talked about corrections, and I think that that's another one of the biggies if you look at where the increases have been coming.
But that that's going to take a little. I mean, maybe you've got something working on an interim study, but some planning in terms of just like we're getting drug courts, which is helping keep some people directly out of our prisons, if that works for them, if they can fit into a drug court scheme. Are we going to need to look at the bigger picture on corrections?
The big problem, number one, we should be paroling more people. That's item number one, because that's maintaining a parolee is 10% of the cost of maintaining someone who is incarcerated. That's item number one. To do that, however, you have to spend money over time, because you have to have the parole officers in place.
Well, that's what I'm
just
talking
as-
about, some planning. I don't
just
want
as
people
foster
turning
care
criminals
once-
out on the street.
And nobody intends to. No,
Right,
that's
and
not our
I-
thought. The
I
thought
don't
is
think
to
they
move
are.
from incarceration to paroling non-violent offenders to the
Yes.
extent that we can. We have hundreds of non-violent offenders who are costing us $30,000 a year in incarceration that could cost us $3,000 a year if we can get a parole and probation system to support that. Yeah.
Well,
But
and would you
the-
rather have people who are released without any services? I mean, if they max out on their sentence and they're just released, there is no.
So that whole system needs to work better anyway,
Yeah.
even if we didn't have a crisis
right.
from the money point of view.
Well, there were, when that closure of LCC was done in the last session, I looked at about 600 rap sheets of people who right now today are on the streets, unless they who were gotten out and are back in now. And believe me, there wasn't a virgin in the group. I mean, we're talking about multiple offenders over time.
So what is the point? Is that
The point
that people that are
there
in
are,
there, they're
they
lo-
should stay, and the people who are the nonviolent that Senator Landis spoke of should be out under the supervision, because with the supervision you at least have some idea of where they are, what they're doing, how well are they going back into
Oh,
society.
absolutely.
And we don't have that now. They serve up to the day they're out, and bang, they're gone, and we don't know where.
All right, so far between this show and the last show we did, we talked about the major renovation of the mental health system. We're
Yes.
talking about maybe major way of rehandling Medicaid, one of our biggest costs, major way of readministering prison, parole, that part of the criminal justice system. These are big things.
There's one more.
Oh, great.
This is
great.
okay. There was a big article in the Omaha World Herald, December 18th, as to what the Child Abuse Board would like to see, and that is also a call for much more money. than is
Right, more
currently being
caseworkers,
spent
more
on it.
social workers. That's a result of all the child deaths and the task force that the governor sent up. They've just
Yes.
given a preliminary recommendation.
What the real problem is, in order to change corrections and mental health and some of these other issues, is we have to have the money to implement those new systems before we can change anything, and we don't have the new money. So in order to move patients out into, or excuse me, move people out into parole, we need the parole officers. We can't just send them out there, so we have to train parole officers, which means more money before we can release the money on the corrections to allow them to go to parole. Same with the mental health.
Right,
We
major
have to have the
systems
money
change.
to do it.
Require, I mean, you can't just say, wake up tomorrow and say, okay, we have a plan and we're going to do it. And so, but I mean, what I
But
guess-
Senator Landis and the other committee chairs have been participating in a study, and all the committees are trying to come up with ways using the budget issues that we've had as a driver for what do we need to be doing better. And I don't think it's a knee-jerk reaction just to the budget. I think it's trying to be thoughtful in how we go about facing the reality, as Senator Landis said, that the revenues are just, at least in Medicaid, the revenues are just not going to be there to sustain this program. So how do you restructure it so that you can make the money you have
go farther.
go?
But when you're making sort of paradigm shifts in some of these, the way we handle, the way we administer, the way we think, these don't happen overnight, and they do take money. So
There's only 4 pots of money to dive into, and we've discussed all of them. State aid being one, Medicaid, Health and Human Services generally, Department of Corrections. Once you get there. You know, you've got money to play with.
Those are the pots of spending money. What about the pots of money that we get in that there was a little rancor over among the ranks of voters about having to raise? You did raise some taxes. You made some tax increases permanent, and they were spotty over a lot of areas. If you want to take the alcohol increase and keeping the cigarette tax up and
I haven't heard
the
about
income
those.
tax.
I've heard about the contractor tax. I've told him to call Dave.
Oh, the sales tax, extending the sales
Yes.
tax on contracts. So what I'm saying is you have done some things to solve some of these budget problems that have been, glaring at you when you were down there last session and the session before, and you've made some changes in revenue. What happens this session in moving to these running things better, making sure we have enough money to run the state? As the head of the revenue committee, what's running through your mind at night?
My theory is that we have essentially exhausted our current tax bases. And I don't think you're going to see a major tax increase in any significant way, which means that I think changes are going to come on a phased basis. We'll need to do the things that Vicki's talking about, which is difficult. We'll need to do that as well planned and as careful as we can, but we don't have a big pot of money. We don't have a tax base we could touch without creating, for example, significant economic problems for us at our borders. Raising the sales tax will exacerbate the difference between Omaha and Iowa, and that will have a negative impact on Omaha business. It's
And we
not
are
available.
in competition with other
right.
folks in the region, and we always compare our gas taxes and various things like that.
Gene's in northeast Nebraska, and the people up there are aware of how much things cost and whether or not crossing the border makes sense. And
Yeah.
the higher our sales tax is, the more it makes sense to go someplace to defeat the sales tax.
I'm going to ask a silly question, and I
Yeah.
put it on my list of things I might ask, but I keep wondering about this internet tax, of why it is so outrageous when we have, I know several people in Omaha who people come into their small stores and say, well, unless you can cut it more to offset the sales tax that I'm going to have to pay for it, I'm going to buy it on the internet. What is so outrageous about all states being able to expect, like with some catalog sales, or even make good on all the catalog sales that are going out of state?
There's a big, big misunderstanding about the internet problem. There is a federal exemption on access to internet. That cannot be taxed. Internet sales can be taxed. In other words, there's not a federal act saying you can't.
Okay, I got you.
However, there's a constitutional problem, and it's the same for the catalogs and the internet. There isn't a special rule for the internet. They suffer from a constitutional principle that keeps us from doing that, and we're attacking that in an interesting and unique way, but it's a relatively complex one called the Streamline Project, and I'll explain it as best I can if you want me to.
But there is something going on to try to make this, legal, or find a way to do it to make it easy for everybody?
Yes.
Is that the concept?
What you have to do constitutionally is make it easy enough for a company who could be faced with determining what the sales tax is on what they're selling and then shipping to other states for 6,000 taxing jurisdictions. Imagine a company who has to keep track of 6,000 jurisdictions and whether what they sell is taxed or not taxed in that area. Because that is so difficult, federal courts have said you can't ask a company to do that. That's a deprivation of due process. That's true for a catalog sales, it's true for internet, and that's the nature of the problem with taxing things across the internet. What we have is a system that's going to give companies a computer program by which the computer program will be able to tell them whether it's taxed or not, and in exchange for the computer program, a number of large companies will voluntarily provide sales taxes to states like Nebraska, so long as we don't tax them on their income tax. That's called the Streamline Project, and in about 5 years it'll net us $25 million.
Whew. That's good to know. So when you've reorganized all these things, you need more money.
And so many of the things that we've done in terms of making changes are not just raising the tax rates, but trying to make sure that our tax structure follows where the economy is going. Because if you don't want it to make things work wrong or be wrong on the borders and things like that, then you have to have it be where the economy is going. The economy is going to internet sales, to more services, those
In
kinds
other words,
of
you have to
things.
be competitive in the sense that you can't price
Yes.
yourself out of something.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of a business
Well,
reality is sort of applied to
And
state.
we are. It brings us somewhat to economic development incentives because
I was going to just, I was
Okay.
looking for what they call LB, it used to be, when it was passed many years ago, LB 775. It's the
Yeah.
something economic, but anyway, I have it on a piece of paper. But we all kind of know when we talk about the
That's what we call
business
it. We call it
incentive.
775 too.
Even though there's practically a new 775 every year. But there is a move afoot to try and get rid of the LB 775 provisions that allow certain economic and tax incentives to businesses involving X number of jobs and all kinds of things. It's kind of complex. Where does that stand? Is there a need in the legislature, or feel of a need to make disclosure of 775 information by these companies more open to the public? Because that seems to be some
Well, I
of
can
the
tell you that my
rancor.
attempts to do that have failed utterly.
Yeah,
Which
last
means,
session.
I mean, I think I don't think the body has concluded there is a need for greater disclosure. And I think that of the issues that are there, that's the one that's probably the most at odds with the public. But the body spoke very clearly last year. We couldn't get disclosure out of the Revenue Committee, and on the floor there was only one person who spoke, two people who spoke for it.
Do you feel that the movement to, the grassroots movement to get 775 is really going anywhere? To get rid of 775?
You mean the petition?
Yeah.
I don't know about the petition. The thing of it is, we have a deal that we struck with a number of companies. We can't change that deal. If you wanted to have a law that would change it from day 15 on, possibly that might get somewhere. I wouldn't vote for it, but as I wouldn't
My
vote
grandfather in the people before. But the question is, though, when you brought up about other states, we do have this pesky little deal that we try to stay somewhat competitive. The other states aren't going to repeal their economic incentives. I mean, are we really caught in a bind in at least having something out there for companies that bring jobs in or add jobs?
I think we are.
Yeah, I think we are caught in that situation. We are caught in that trap. I think the conversation that we have now, which is leave 775 alone, or make cosmetic changes, which is what the supporters of 775 generally would do, or repeal it, is a false dilemma. Pam raised a question not long ago when she said, look, well, if you were going to start over on mental health, would you design what we have now? No. If you were to start over on $100 million of economic development, would you create 775? And the answer is no. States who have done things in the last 15 years have chosen to do different things. They've been able to give land, which we can't do. They invest in workforce development, which we don't do. There are later generations of tax incentives that are probably more effective than 775. The conversation I think that we should be having is what's the son of 775 that would increase the effectiveness of the program, which was at one time more effective than I think it is now. I think it's losing its effectiveness as other states develop incentives that are more attractive than what we have. How should we retool what we have to be more effective? That's, I think, the conversation that people like Gene and myself, who have a world of difference between us if we talk about 775 going backwards,
Yeah.
might find agreement on going forwards.
That's very possible.
Is
but
there something in the works on that looking?
It's hard to do. There are some attempts to discuss it. The Omaha Chamber of Commerce is looking to get a consultant. I'm looking at some areas in other states for what they're doing. I think there is some attempt to start that conversation.
And again, as we said in the last show that we did, the first segment of this show, I guess you could say, is that there's only so many things that are going to happen this session because of the budget
Right.
problems. So
No.
that's probably not.
I think this is lower priority. Structurally on our schedule, we have a number of significant pieces. The helmet bill, the lethal injection, the concealed carry, who are on the agenda. They're carryovers and they're priority bills. They will dominate the early agenda.
But they will dominate the first part
Right.
of the
Right.
agenda.
The first part.
Once we get down to business and quit fooling around with one another, then we're going to talk the budget.
Pam says speak for yourself. But anyway, we have just a couple of minutes left. I want to ask about education, higher education and state aid. Is there anything, K through 12 and on up are all a little worried about budget cuts, including the people in this building, so I would be remiss not to ask. What can we see happening?
I think everything's on the table again, just as it was before. There were some cuts. Just depends on how long that budget crisis lasts, whether there will be more cuts.
I would agree.
But state aid education at least is in the courts and possibly another lawsuit. And I'm not asking you to comment on that case, but I mean, there is concern about its fairness, its equity in terms of the students it has to serve. I mean,
There will be an education bill that will essentially reform, what was the number, 806 in 1997? Where it goes, I don't know, but you have to come back to Willie Sutton's answer, the bank robber. They said, why did you rob banks? And he says, that's where the money is. And that's where the money is also, state aid to education, generally.
But if you believe in economic development and you believe that the future of this state is how you grow jobs, the people that we have and the training that they receive through the K-12 and higher education is very critical to that piece. You don't just get businesses to locate because you have satchels full of money. You have to have people who can take the jobs and do a good job.
do you think, we just have a minute, do you think the state aid formula as it is right now is pretty much fair in terms of its attempt to give property relief?
The most basic part of it is fair. If it's defining the what goes into it. I mean, you take the needs minus the resources, and that equals the aid. It's all the little factors that go into arriving at the needs that I believe that we will deal with.
Okay, we have 30 seconds left. I'm going to take a very quick poll. Does anyone here think they will not survive this session?
This is
I'm
my
going to
last
survive.
session.
It's just Gene I'm worried about. But I think I'm going to make it.
Well,
I'm a
and then
much better
if
shot
term
than
limits
you
stay
are,
in
Dave.
place, then you only have a little more to worry about for some of you that have been around for a while, and then that's a whole other show.
We're probably all wiped out fairly quickly.
Well, I want to thank Senator Brown, Senator Tyson, Senator Landis, and Senator McDonald. I wish you all the best. I watch you on public television doing your thing, some of the hardest working people in show business. Thank you so much. Join us next week for Consider This.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.